Hello, everybody. This is the Disinforesilience Network channel, and I want to welcome Emily Hausheer. And I'm so totally honest, this is the second attempt already of this recording because I failed a little bit to pronounce your name correctly, even if we already met personally in the United States, in Washington, D.C. last year. So please, Emily, introduce yourself better than I could do it. What have you been doing in the last years? What are your expertise and what are we going to talk about today?
Absolutely. I do love the new nickname. I may start adopting it for my Starbucks name. But my expertise is in democracy, human rights, and international relations. And in recent years, I'm working on researching the ways all the autocratic powers work in a network and how we can have democracies, especially the United States and European Union countries, collaborate better and listening to the dissidents from autocratic countries because the dissidents are really on the front lines, and especially listening to people from Ukraine, which is really on the front line between democracy and autocracy.
Yeah, thank you very much for the first introduction. I remember we talk already since more than a year, and you were one of the first persons who reached out to me when I started with the Disinfo Resilience Network, and to realize that it's very important that we also connect, not only autocratic regimes connect, and also agents of influence. And we talked also a lot about the polarization of society. How is the situation in the United States regarding international relations, regarding the perception of what is happening in the world? Let's see, Venezuela, for instance, but also Russia, China, North Korea, and so on. Do you see a change, or is it a weird time? I mean, it's worldwide a little bit a confusion. Let's say we are confused, it seems, as societies.
Confused is a perfect word. The United States right now is a very, very polarized society. A lot of that's really coming off of social media because a lot of paid influencers are pushing agendas that are either very, very far left or very, very far right. And of course, this creates a reaction. If somebody pushes too far to the left, for example, then people will push far to the right. And you're losing a lot of voters in the middle because the average American citizen, the average American voter, is a little bit turned off by the ideologues. So they start retreating inward. And we really need to start coming back, having many ideologies. And we have ideologies on the left, on the right, but we need that room for compromise. And there are bad actors like Russia, Iran, China, and Venezuela, especially provoking this tension in the United States. And they're really trying to isolate us from Europe as well, because I know that the United States to be stronger with our European alliances or with our European networks. And a lot of the information I've seen villainizes different American groups, try to turn different groups against each other when they don't realize they have more in common than they originally thought. For example, there was a model government group, which I'm very familiar with. They do model civics camps for teenagers. And somewhere on the internet, they circulated false narratives claiming this was a far right indoctrination group. It wasn't true at all. And I looked at the site, it was very if anything, center of the aisle. Maybe some of them were a little bit more Reagan conservative, but there was nothing far right about it. And these bots, I don't even believe were based in the United States. I couldn't figure out where they were exactly, but they might have possibly been Russian, attacking a model government camp for teaching teenagers in a nonpartisan fashion. They played both like liberals, like conservative members of Congress about civics.
What I appreciate a lot about you and our discussions is that you are one of the few people who realize that the problem regarding foreign the perception of the world, let's say, and radicalization. It's not only the far right, even if the far right is maybe now more visible, but we have, especially if it's about Russia, about China, we have also a lot of problems in the far left, and they are unfortunately in somehow influencing the center politics as well. And there is also a connection, this horseshoe, I call it the Russian horseshoe, between far right and far left individuals who support Russia, and sometimes they even have the same agents of influence. What is your perception of this phenomenon, and why is it such a taboo? I mean, do you see liberal circles, liberals also, I mean, the American, what the American call liberals, not the European um, understanding of that word. Do you see them discussing this, the phenomenon of tankies, for instance, when we take a look at Venezuela and all this victim blaming regarding opposition figures?
Sometimes there was a group of Tanquis attacking Juan Guaido in 2019 when he was declared the legitimate president of Venezuela. They went after his ambassador and then they took over the Venezuelan embassy here in DC. They trashed it and then they started yelling at Venezuelan refugees. And these Venezuelan refugees were not far right. They were refugees. They fled to the United States for political safety, for food, for medicine. And I did hear some on the left denouncing them, but I think that sometimes people don't denounce the extremism on their own side, which, if anything, makes the polls worse, especially because it makes it easier for bad actors to send infiltrators. So someone might not really believe in the ideology, but they'll say, here's a place for a fight. Here's a place for me to polarize the country further. Because there have always been radicals, and people have always been free to express any viewpoint that they desire. But when it gets to the point where we don't see each other as humans, that's a very dangerous place to be.
Where does this polarization is going to lead us? Is it only, I mean, some people say it's a completely domestic problem, but of course, foreign interference campaign, they are at least fueling this or amplifying the tendencies, it seems at least. What is your observation? Can you tell us a couple of examples how these campaigns work? I mean, the United States is, of course, the number one target of such anti-Western actors. How does it work?
Definitely. So it especially makes it hard for politicians because you're on the front line, you're running a campaign, and you need donations. And sometimes a lot of money gets funneled into either, this was mentioned in foreign agents, a lot of consulting firms. And consulting firms, while they're private, may promote certain agendas and may try to take down any candidate that speaks against them. So that's a little bit of a problem. And then the other problem is what happens in one country doesn't stay in one country because we're all connected. So the United States is very connected to France, very connected to Germany. And even when we get outside the democratic world into the autocracies, we could see the Iranian funds coming into American institutions, especially the private sector. And then from there, we see Iranian dissidents coming to the US and warning us about transnational repression. And transnational repression's an even bigger trend nowadays. It used to be that you could be exiled or you could be a refugee, and it's a horrific experience. But now, countries like Venezuela, where if you're exiled, the dictator will try to turn public opinion against you. Of course, Venezuela has no free press. They have no freedom of speech. So we'll have cases of young Venezuelan political leaders who have easily 80% approval ratings, people in the streets protesting for them. And these are opposition politicians who have been tortured, imprisoned, harassed. And if they're forced to flee the country, and Applebaum mentioned this at Autocracy Inc., and I've observed this on social media, the Venezuelan regime practices a very unique way of doing psychological torture. They'll have millions of bots harassing these opposition leaders, usually saying the same words over and over again. Usually they say silence or your time has passed. And they like saying the whole country hates you. So they create this very toxic environment. And if anyone tries to speak up, all these bots will come after you, and then they'll spread conspiracy theories about refugees who fled. So you'll have a picture of a Venezuelan opposition leader drinking coffee or eating a croissant somewhere in Paris, and it might be totally innocent. And then you'll have millions of bots saying, they stole humanitarian aid, they're living in luxury. And of course, there's no proof of this. They're just drinking a Starbucks somewhere in New York City, speaking at a human rights conference. But there's no freedom of speech in Venezuela, so anyone that says otherwise gets arrested. And it hurts these dissidents who are abroad because they really want to get their words back into their country.
You triggered another question. I think it's a slightly philosophical question, maybe. Yeah? When what you're explaining here, this is victim blame, and basically what happens with the displaced people from Venezuela, also from Ukraine. Many Ukrainians experience this. What is wrong with our societies, or what is wrong with these people who? I mean, these people who fled from the regimes, who are in opposition to these regimes, these are people who wanna be part of the Western democratic free world. In South America, they wanna be closer to America. Closer to the United States. In Europe, these people wanna be closer to the European Union, or wanna even join the European Union. They admire us. They admire our values, and we push them away. Yeah, we hate them for that, and we try to embrace the enemies of the free world and all these autocrats. We appease them. What kind of pathological behavior is this, if you think about it? Do you have any explanation? And do you have the same? Do you share that is strange? This happening in so many countries and in the Western world. Do we have? Okay, I will put it that way. Do we suffer from self-hate?
I believe we do, especially I know about Americans have a self-loathing instinct as well as people from other countries as well. Russia really plays into this, and there are incredible dissidents from Cuba, Venezuela, as well as people from Ukraine who are working to build a democracy during the Maidan Revolution. And in the cases of many of the Venezuelan dissidents, they want to go back to their country, they want to return. So the dictator knows that, and he's trying to turn the people there against them. And then there's a bit of xenophobia that sometimes comes in with different countries where people are afraid of the unknown. So instead of learning from these experiences, instead of listening to the people, they put up walls. And these walls are then aggravated by the internet discourse stoking fear instead of stoking understanding. And sometimes it can even be a language barrier. But once those barriers are broken down, we need to understand each other on a human level instead of the whole discourse that the internet gives us.
You also mentioned universities as a place where, I mean, universities I think all around the Western world, universities unfortunately are manipulated and infiltrated. So it's by money, by personnel, by agents of influence. What are your observations, without mentioning names, yeah, just to be on the safe side, but what are your observations in the United States? Because we have a couple of academics and they travel around the world. They also matter, as you said, in Europe and in other countries because everybody speaks or understands at least some English. Um, do you think that changed, that increased, or was it always the same? I mean, we know the Soviets did it back in the days, but is it more now? And does it matter? Because they can use all the footage of these professors then on social media and share it around. So, what is your observation regarding all these Venezuela, China, and also Middle Eastern topics? And we saw a lot of escalations recently.
Definitely. So I agree. I'm not getting names for safety because there's still some investigations, but in foreign agents, Casey Michelle mentioned how UAE has poured in a lot of money. And I also heard on a podcast how there's been numerous historians at universities who have received hundreds of thousands of dollars in unreported money. And these might be historians teaching US history, as not to paint them all with a broad light, but I kind of wonder if the lack of funding in some fields causes people to seek funding where it might not be ethical. So that in itself is a huge problem. And then, or they might sincerely believe they're receiving ethical money. And then after a while, because there's no transparency, they're being fed these narratives promoting, in the case of this American historian, he was promoting Russian imperialism. And he was saying, oh, the US is the imperialists. The US did bad things, which, yes, the US has definitely not had a perfect historical record. No country has. But he glossed over Russian imperialism completely. So that was a red flag. And then some students are afraid to speak because you have, in some cases, Russia and China, you have both legitimate, innocent students, but you also have people that will report back to the regime for a reward for their family. So that's a form of transnational repression because the innocent students from Russia and China should be allowed to express themselves in a university classroom. And there are some excellent professors out there who are great and who have really good topics. And sometimes the usage of recording something out of context with a phone in class holds them back from discussions for fear something will be misinterpreted. And then, of course, you get these institutions which are funneling money, and it's a form of soft diplomacy, but there needs to be more transparency because then some of it is going back into these either polarizing black and white narratives and missing the nuance. There definitely has to be some transparency of funding.
Yeah, and one thing is the money, and the other thing is about the narratives. And I'm wondering, because I have, we have these networks where we discuss things like we're discussing now, and then sometimes people approach me and they say, "Yeah, for you this is clear, but for the common person it's not clear." And I say, "No, but it seems so obvious to me, yeah." And maybe I'm somehow blind to that the average person doesn't see it. But if you take a look at these professors, yeah, that are highly influenced and it's super biased and very one-sided, they criticize only the United States, they excuse China, Russia, and all this autocratic bloc. How is it possible that our group of people that it seems like family? Yeah? I think there it seems like we are only hundreds of people who understand what is going on. Why is the world so? Do you think that some people prefer to ignore these developments because it's not so easy to point it out that one of your colleagues maybe is dangerous, or that they want the money at the universities, or why so many people decide to turn a blind eye on that phenomenon which is so prevalent worldwide?
I think it's fear and sometimes uncertainty, since people might know something bad's going on, but then a self-preservation instinct turns in and they want to turn the other way. Kind of like in the movie Wicked. I know it's complicated, but there's one character where she knows there's a narrative going on and she knows it's wrong, but she's afraid if she speaks, something will happen to her. I'm not going to say too much details in case there's any listeners who don't know the full story yet, but I think that's what a lot of people are going through right now.
Do
And
you
they know the autocrats are powerful, but I do believe there are more people who want the truth, but they're just very fragmented, and we need networks of democracy. So we need like networks in academia, and we need networks in politics. Most importantly, we need new young politicians to get into the decision-making spaces and academics. So we need to learn from each other. We need to build these networks. And we need a network even in the entertainment industry and the music industry and the business world, especially. The business world, I think, is going to be the hardest, but they need a network as
think?
well of democracy defenders.
You managed young people, and I think it's very important because they, especially in the cyber world, I mean, this cliche is for sure true that they have some skills that the elderly don't have. But what I like about some of the elderly is that I know a guy who is not on social media, so he doesn't have any social media accounts, and he just goes to universities, to lectures, to events. And he's very aware that there is a lot of Russian, Chinese, and anti-Semitism in the offline world, that there are still a lot of offline operations. And this is what what I think in general the discourse lacks a little bit. We sometimes it's like it's only social media. Unfortunately, it's not. What do you think about
Oh
that?
no.
That some people, I mean, when they discuss disinformation and foreign interference, that they just minimize the problem. It's just a cyberspace problem, and it doesn't concern us in the real world.
Definitely, because you could be picking up a newspaper, and newspaper will be filled with lies and or even just subtle disinformation and subtle propaganda. I remember, I'm not going to name the university, but a university in the United States did a free lecture on Russian history. And I thought, oh,
On
this is
what?
interesting.
Excuse me, on what?
Russian his
Yeah,
Russian
yeah.
history. I was like, oh, let me see how it turns out. And the beginning started out like Catherine the Great, Peter the Great, and all the facts and dates. But then it sort of wove in a little subtleties, introducing the US culture war, introducing some other stuff, and then showing Russia as a victim, which I thought, imagine being in the height of the South American wars for independence. When Simon Bolivar in Venezuela is trying to hold off the Spanish, 70% of Venezuela's population, civilian populations affected or killed, and Spain is coming into South America, only for someone to say, actually, Spain's the real victim in this. That's not a case of victim. Spain was the clear aggressor. Just not nowadays, it's 1800s, but just as Russia now is the clear aggressor. Do I believe there's people inside Russia speaking against imperialism? I do. There's definitely people inside Russia. They're very persecuted, but the Russian government is at war with the West and is at a classic imperialistic war against Ukraine for territory.
Why is this? I mean, when I would try to formulate this sentence a little bit more, let's say, provocative, I would say for the Western left, Russian imperialism is not attractive, because they like imperialism only it's when it's from Western country. I mean, they see it only there, and even this so-called anti-imperialistic movement, they are pro-Moscow, and they didn't change anything. And when I speak about the European parties, then I see that the whole Western left, they did not develop since the Cold War, since the so-called peace movement, which was always very fond of Moscow. And unfortunately, the far right increased. It's much more bigger now than it was during the 80s or even the 90s. And they are also pro-Moscow. So I would say we are F, yeah? And that's the terrible situation. And the only good thing we have in Europe that the Greens are much better than the Jill Stein imagination of what green policy is. But what do you think? Can we do anything to raise more awareness for this, or will they always label us as some kind of Reagan 2.0 activists? Or is there any chance? Because I see the same conspiracy theories on both sides. I mean, the far right is now like they are, but the far left, it's basically the same since the Cold War.
Definitely. I've noticed it as well. And then believe it or not, once you get out of the English speaking space, there's even more propaganda out there. RT has immense operations in Spanish and Portuguese, completely flooding their information space. So a lot of it's exposure as well as verification by your side. So even if you're not doing the work, you're not doing the research, your side is saying US bad, Russia's opposed to the US, Russia good. Then you start believing the narrative without thinking. And it sort of goes along with group mentality. So if you're having a bunch of high school students and they're doing something dangerous to be popular, you may not fully be thinking of the consequences, but you're going along with it. So it's a bit of a mob mentality.
Yeah, that's totally my analysis. Thank you. That's but difficult. I think I mean I have the idea that if we agree on the analysis on a high scale, yeah, on worldwide, then it's all the half of the way is already done. Yeah, because unfortunately, most of the people they don't even get what's going on. I'm curious. I want to ask you what something completely different. What happened to the old school Republicans? Are there a lot left? I mean. the ones who really cared about Europe and transatlantic relationship, all this Reagan era spirit of defeating Moscow and having a clear position. I mean, all these 80s, like the movies were that I grew up with also in Europe. Is there anything left of it, or is it all MAGA now?
They're still out there. It was strange how fast MAGA really moved. I remember in 2016, I was finishing up my last semester of undergrad, and we had all the presidential candidates come to my university campus, except Hillary. She couldn't make it, but we had all the others. We had Bernie. And I thought, no way Trump's going to win. I don't think so. And he won. And because my university president made a complicated, controversial political statement, which was his right in a democracy to make, people painted the whole campus as having his views. I think that was really a sign of what was to come because I was like, well, it's a lot of students, hundreds of thousands of students, especially like in person where I was, as well as online. We all believe different things. We may not all necessarily fall under the umbrella of one person's statement. So we take the statement of a group, one person who's the leader, and apply it to a group, which I think is also a little bit of a dangerous trend.
Do you think that civil society plays a bigger role now than, for instance, 10 years ago or 5 years ago? Because we have, I mean, in Austria, for instance, we have now, maybe soon we have a far-right government, and the FPÖ is a quite, let's say, Moscow-friendly party. They don't care so much about EU integration and things like that. Is civil society, especially in these days, important to keep our values, to keep our general direction, and not, I mean, we see that Hungary, it seems the effect is irreversible.
It is. Civil society is important. One opinion I have that's slightly off topic is I think that having walkable cities and more community will help strengthen our civil society. I think that we really need to focus on political society as well, because political society is being neglected. So we gotta get good people at civil society who understand civics to enter the political space. And we also need to learn from those who are, there are incredible people in office now on both sides of the aisle that I know are doing great work, but kind of under the scenes. So we need to start learning from them and collaborating.
I like the off topic. Tell me about the walkable cities, what you have in mind.
Uh, so walkable cities. Yeah, I notice like for me, when I if I take the metro downtown and I get a coffee, I get to know the people at the coffee shop. Or when you go to church, you talk to people after church, and then you go to like small groups and you go to a restaurant, you might notice, oh, I know that person. She is also on the hill part-time. And then you start building the relationships where when we're all isolated online, we start seeing each other as a username.
Yeah, I always thought that this is some advantage of small cities and even towns, that they are very close connected politics and civil societies, and they have all their institutions, that maybe the impact of social media is less there. And I was for a couple, I gave a couple of lectures in the rural areas, and it was really the case. Some people were not even registered, and they say, yeah, maybe global politics, yeah, but on the local level it is there and it is a problem, and they have their specific issues. And of course the urban areas have advantages, the big ones, but I really like that people are so close to each other and they talk, and I think we stopped talking also in the real life, which is problematic.
So I definitely agree. We have less communication verbally and less social life, which I think we need to enhance some more for a flourishing democracy. On one point about dictatorships, yeah, so we're short on time. I know in the case of Ukraine, they were actually trying to get some of the disinformation narratives of the propagandists before the ICC. And a similar method was done with sort of beginning with Venezuela, because the way that the trolls and bots attacked Leopoldo Lopez and Juan Guaido was so extreme that there's actually enough evidence to classify this as psychological torture. So all the comments were submitted to the ICC as evidence of torture. So I'm wondering if we crack down on the whole propaganda network, we in democracies point to like this is all a form of oppression, then it might be clearer to fight back.
Do you believe that would you agree that we are in an information world war and that the autocrats united in a way, in the information space at least, they never did before? I mean, I always say BRICS plus against us, and there is even a plus after BRICS plus, people who are
Yeah.
affiliated but not official members. The things like you mentioned before, do they all collaborate? Because, for instance, when China pushes messages like don't believe Western media, when they push this in Instagram or in TikTok, that works also for the others. So,
Yes, they're all connected in a network. And if anything, I would argue that the time in history we're most similar to is anything between the 1780s to the 1830s. One mistake that we do is we always compare it to the 20th century, but I'm like, mm-mm. Think about maybe 1830s when Europe had all the absolute monarchs unified because they didn't want those dangerous French ideas to spread. And I remember reading a letter from a revolutionary at the barricades who mentioned the autocrats are collaborating and Russia just invaded Poland. And I was like, whoa, this sounds like real, well, Russia invaded Ukraine. This sounds like real life. And we're facing a similar dynamic today. The autocrats are collaborating, they share disinformation. Venezuela is providing Russia with ways to seemingly turn people against opposition figures. Russia is providing Venezuela with military weapons in return. China is giving everyone economic tips, and Iran is saying, hey, here's some ways to avoid sanctions. So they're all collaborating, and it has nothing to do with ideology. It has all to do with power. And just as they were saying in the 1830s how they didn't want the French ideas to spread, now we can say we don't want those color revolutions to spread. So like, wait a second, they're so afraid of these color revolutions. But it's really just repeating a cycle. So we need democracy defenders to realize this, and we need to unite, we need to collaborate. Actually, going back to something incredible Leopoldo Lopez said is we need to start setting aside our ideologies and we need to start fighting for democracy and regaining hope in democracy because a lot of people, even within democracies, they've lost hope. They're like, yeah, I don't know if it's the best system. I don't know. We need to regain that, which happens both through civil society, the civic space, but also through dissidence. I believe there's great value when I hear Leopoldo Lopez, when I hear Gary Kasparov, when I hear the protesters in Georgia, and Felix Barrandiaga in Nicaragua. They believe in democracy. They're committed to fighting for it. And I think we need to regain that excitement in the US. We need to watch the musical 1776 with a little bit of a sense of pride and like they're risking their lives to fight for a better world. And they have disagreements, they have arguments, but we have a right to civic participation, which is incredible. I see political rights as fundamental. And while other rights stem from it, sometimes we get so caught up in ideology that we're like, oh, this is this way, my way or the highway. Where it's like, no, we need to start unifying again under that common ground. Ideology is fine to debate, fine to discuss, but let's get to fair, free elections and free democratic process.
we have only a couple of minutes left, so
I noticed,
I
sad.
come I come to my final question. Would you agree? Did we forget how blessed we are to live in freedom and democracy? And is this maybe the main problem that we lack solidarity with democracy movements, for instance, in Georgia and in Belarus? And I saw so many people who do not care about these people at all because they just want to be closer to us, and we have this self-hate, and we forget how blessed we are with democracy. So would you
We
agree, or
do.
is this?
We do. One of the Venezuelan opposition leaders actually said this is a battle of the heart and the mind just as much as it's a battle of narratives. We have lost faith, and there are definitely bad things. Every country's committed it, probably even little Andorra and little Liechtenstein. But at the end of the day, we can have this conversation without being arrested.
Mhm.
If we were in an autocratic country, that would not be the case. We'd be arrested for revealing their narratives. We'd be imprisoned for just going to the streets looking like we're going to go to a protest. And we lost that. And we lost how, through the democratic process, you could solve injustices. Martin Luther King led an incredible civil rights movement. They protested, they used nonviolent tactics, and they were able to bring immense change. It was hard, it was difficult. He was unjustly imprisoned, he faced horrific backlash, but we can bring change in democracies. And I believe the world sort of forgot it. We got comfortable and then we learned about the things that weren't so savory. And instead of saying this is how we could change it, we've lost hope. We need to regain hope.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful conclusion. And it's really great that you joined our program and looking forward to hear you again. Emily Hausheer,
Oh,
please,
sure.
Hausheer, yeah, I will practice, I promise. It was very
I
great to
like
have
it. I
you.
like it.